Go out and count. Count.
You count, but when you're having in a piece of paper, how do you report the inventories for a particular week? Let's say day, week, month. How do you report them?
Snapshot in time.
Isn't it average?
Wouldn't it depend on the system?
It depends on the system, but usually we say we have 3 days of inventory. And you have 3 days of inventory all the month, right? The question is, do you actually have 3 days of inventory constantly? It fluctuates. These things fluctuate, all of them, but we consider the averages. Why? Because we cannot have constantly appearing by magic items in a very specific place. They have to be ordered, they have to be fabricated, they have to come, and they have to be utilized. Again, the delay is affected by the supply chain. And if we look at every very specific moment in time, we're going to see those fluctuations. How do we get that delay a little bit more complex? As we add more elements into the system. That's exactly what happens in the beer game. I'm a consumer, and then there is a big factory in St. Louis, Missouri that is going to be fabricating that particular beer that I'm going to drink. How many elements in the chain to get that beer have to touch that product in between? How many distributors? How many warehouses? How many times that particular product was transported from point A to point B to point C, D, E? How many in-between processes have to happen? And each one of those processes have their own system, their own feedback loops, right? And if you try to map this thing out, the more that you think about it, the more complex it gets, right? So those delays cause these oscillations, okay? The thing here is basically to try to think that way. Not everything is just specific or pointed effect. Everything is going to be affected by certain boundaries or certain motivators to have a faster growth. Let's just think, I read a very interesting thing, this was like 2-3 years ago, which was a population of Knoxville. And that article said the population in Knoxville has not grown since the 60s, that it has come steady with actually some decay. Why is that? What is the boundary?
The city? Is it the city?
The city?
Most people are moving out into the urban areas.
What's missing? Is it the interest of the city to grow? Would it have an economic impact or a benefit for the current residents to grow? Positive effect, negative effect, what happens? How does it work? Now let me tell you the contrary. The place I come from, when I was born, was possibly 1/3 the population that it is now. How did it grow? What are the problems associated with that? It's the same phenomenon, and it's not self-regulated as the same phenomenon. That's another of the mistakes that we make. We tend to compare because it's the same situation that they will behave the same. they won't, because the systems that they have in interaction are different. What is happening here? You have a very large metro area 4 hours south. You have another that is large and growing, that is 2 hours west. And geographically, this is very, very comfortable. And I don't see, well, I don't know if with the expansions that are happening, that's going to create, again, a little boom, but again, probably it will self-limit. Another kind of thing, the environment that is around it. Most cities here in the United States have all the services. So the quality of life in a small town as in a big city actually could be better. And when you go to Mexico, that's not the case, totally not the case. A small town has very limited services compared to a big city. It's a big, huge contrast. So does that motivate to keep other areas growing? Of course. And what is the importance of the nonlinearities? Understanding nonlinearities is going to help us to see that the effects are not always going to be as we expect. Okay? We might be a little bit more accurate if we think that effects can balance or go up than if they just go in a straight line. Okay? And the other thing is they affect considerably the strength of feedback loops. Why? Because the decisions that we make and the systems that we put in place will be basically contrasting or stimulating some of the other systems. Does that make sense? Going back to the example we showed like the last time I was here, why do these regulations like the restriction of hazardous substances happen? Why do governments care about that? What's happening? Why do they have to create policies about that?
The effect on the environment, because the economical gain is first before the other effects on the surrounding environment, which has limitations.
Because if they were doing the right thing, it's for the help of the environment. But at the end of the day is they're going to spend more money trying to heal the environment than placing the policy, right? So that's how a lot of these things happen. And that's one of the points, and it's mentioned in the book. If you understand the leverage points within a system and how can you affect through the nonlinearities, that's exactly where policies can be placed. Policy makers place focus on these particular points, all right? All right, the next part, boundaries. How do we bound the system? Where does it start? Where does it end? We're talking about hierarchies, self-regulation, and all this stuff. So if we were highly detailed in representing a system, we will never finish, right? Because everything is part of something else, and something else, and something else, and something else, something else. But what sets the boundaries of our systems, or at least of our models?
Our imagination.
Imagination,
Well, basically your inputs and your outputs, right? So
your inputs and outputs.
what's your goal, and then, and what do you have to add to the system to get there?
specifically is what is the variable of interest, right? Why are we doing a representation? Why are we doing a representation?
Understand the variable.
Why are we creating a system?
Ultimately, we do that so you can.
So that we can understand a particular phenomenon, a structure. We're trying to explain behavior. So the boundaries are going to be set by all those elements that deem relevant for that particular behavior we're looking for, right? But you always have to be inquisitive if those boundaries are correct for the representation that we're dealing with. Let me ask you one example. For you guys, and anybody can answer voluntarily, who is your family? Anyone? Who is your family? When you hear about family, the concept of family, who is your family?
People related by blood and marriage.
Where does it start?
Immediate.
Depends on who you want to claim.
If you won the lottery, then everybody is.
Yeah, you start having relatives everywhere. For you, from heart, where does your family start? Where does it end?
You set the boundaries. What to include.
So, what is your family?
My son, my girlfriend, my dogs,
That's your family.
immediate family.
What determines who is your family?
Me.
You determine that by
Relationship.
behavior. Anybody else that wants to share? Who's your family?
I don't know, in some cases, Bill and I are family because we have common experience in the Navy. Not necessarily together, but,
But that would be considered.
yeah.
Okay. So it depends on context as well. So let me share with you because I know it's gonna be a contrast. For me, family is basically almost all of my hometown. Not really, but the probability that I see somebody that is related to me by blood when I go back to my hometown in a city that is about close to 1 million people is very, very high in every day. So that I have friends that they joke with me that they say, yeah, the entire city is your family. And for how does that happen? For me, my family is not only because I have blood relation, it's because I see them with frequency and we intend to meet each other with frequency. Possibly I'm not interacting on a one-by-one basis with every single person, but I know who they are, they know who I am, I know who their kids are, they know who my friends, they know everything. And we get together, the big family on my dad's side, we do an annual, I haven't been there for a long time, but they do an annual gathering where you have 500 people and growing. And it's just the brothers and sisters of my grandfather and their kids. So we come from a tradition of large families. My granddad had 7 siblings. Each one of them had about 10 in average. So my dad is one of 10. And my generation is where sanity started happening. So yeah, in my generation, families at most is 4 or 5 people. In average is 2. I just have 1 sibling. And that's basically my family. And I know that what determines that is basically the context, the environment, the traditions, the culture. So the surroundings determine the boundaries of the analysis that we're making. If you ask me, like, okay, we have an emergency, who would I go to? I would probably go to my family because of many reasons. So that again is one more set of criteria that adds on into who my family is. Right? Now, I'm not saying I don't have friends that I consider like brothers, but that, I don't know if that's contextual. So that's the thing. When we're modeling, we have to be very careful where the boundaries are set. Okay? Because we might be overlooking at a very important part of the system. So this one is excerpted from the book. It explains where the car manufacturer, how the system is represented. So you have the processing of raw materials as a flow, and the raw materials as stock here. Then you have production as a flow, inventory as stock. Then you have sales as a flow, consumer home stocks. Okay? That means every household, how many cars they have. And then you have a flow, regulating flow, depreciation of this car. And then that's the boundary set here. But it doesn't stop there, okay? What if our interest is pollution or recycling? Where does disposed cars going? What happens to them afterwards? Are they used again as raw materials? Are these raw materials used to make more cars? Or are they going for somewhere, another place? So when setting boundaries, the only consideration that the author recommends is that just ask yourself the questions if you're making it too narrow or too broad. Okay? If there is a variable of interest that is present in another place that deems relevant, just include it. Okay? Don't make it too narrow. And again, when doing this, if you think that you have too many feedback loops in your representation, then you might have a very broad system that does not affect what is your interest in a particular moment. The other element to consider, going back to what explains the system, so the factors, the inputs, okay, can be the most limiting elements in a system. And that's very obviously explained by this phenomenon. Okay? In production, what do we have? Bottlenecks. Okay? When we have bottlenecks, how many representations of bottlenecks can we have? It's either a limitation of people in the process, it's either a limitation of machines, is there a limitation of processing time, is there a limitation of materials, is there a limitation for energy? There are many things that can limit our systems. The inputs are the most limiting factor. We have to understand that. Okay? there's going to be always one input that is going to constrain the entire system. We spoke a little bit about the delays already. So I guess I can't explain more than that. The delay of ordering, the time it takes from one decision to be executed can be a balancing factor to create that wave. Okay. And some of these, there is a table I didn't include here. Explains very well how different delays might affect in regulating factors. There are certain goal-seeking feedback loops where the delay tends to balance itself over time, and that is known as the learning curve. A delay in the beginning might take very long, so the wave would be like this. As the system learns the behavior, that wave gets reduced and is affected by another subsystem, which is known as the learning curve. So think of yourselves anytime that you have started doing an activity that is repetitive in nature. The first time it took you longer. As you repeat, it will go down. So the delay gets minimized, and again, after a certain time, the goal-seeking pattern starts following that linearity in the stock. Okay? There are some others that get amplified. Okay? And that's when the system is unbalanced and tries just to follow an exponential pattern, and possibly is not a goal-seeking pattern, is more like an exponential pattern. So the amplification keeps growing until it gets out of control. When it gets out of control, there must be a limiting factor again. Okay? The last item here is basically that systems have a structure or behavior over the long term, right? But traditionally, we make decisions on what we see right now. That's known as bounded rationality, and is not a mistake. It's basically that we make decisions based on what is in front of us. When you're doing your model representation, try not to be bounded by this rationality of the short term. Think about the longer term. When you're doing systems modeling, systems thinking, even though the behavior and the pattern is in the structure and is going to be explained over time, try to think about timeless design. When you're doing the design, think of it as timeless. That was one of the most important rules for information systems modeling. When you're dealing with information, you have to think about all the interfaces, all the users, all the flows of information, all the repositories as timeless, because that's how you're designing the system to work, right? Where are all the elements of the system interacting? When you're dealing with these systems thinking, do the same. Try to think timeless. Even though time is one of the most important variables, if you start thinking timeless, you're going to find a little bit more of feedback loops that are relevant or, into the system. Is that okay?
Can you give an example of that?
Of timeless representation?
Yeah, like thinking through a system in a timeless.
Well, basically, what I mean by timeless is that you focus on the stock and flow, okay? And if you set a timeless representation, you don't think of the effect of that stock and flow afterwards. You think on the immediate interaction that these elements have. As basic as we have this building right here, right? Where if we want to represent the system of how this program works, okay? We know this program works on a semester basis, and that we use only for certain periods of time, 3 months, 4 months. But if we bound to that specific period of time, that we have this interaction right here, maybe we are bounding the element of how the learning process should be thought of, how the material should be designed, things like that. So the system in itself will have possibly design of the curriculum. And the design of the curriculum in nature has to be done before the course starts, right? But in the system of education, you have to have that element that could be shown in parallel to another element. All right? Any other questions? So chapter 4 is very simple. Is mostly about the advice on what to consider when dealing with systems thinking. Okay, it doesn't go in depth into the specific patterns of the system in itself, but just the general characteristics and what you should be considering before designing certain systems. So, any other questions, guys? No? That okay? So, in summary, do not look for events, look for structure, try to identify behavior. Okay? Be careful with the boundaries and consider the nonlinearity. Okay? Now, let me just do one thing here. What time is it?
It's done.
I went over. I'm sorry. So, there is a business case already published, okay, in Blackboard, in assignments, okay? It's individual, and you will have to play a simulation to run an airplane company. So, we'll give you the access code next week for that simulation. So you play that simulation. Is basically making decisions to run the company. You keep your records on what decisions you made, and then you have to do the systems modeling for your strategies that you follow to run that company. Okay? As an example, there is another business case that I gave you the link in there. It's about another company that is AC units, fabrication of AC units, but it's similar outcomes that are expected from your business case. So take that as a reference. Read it. It's about the strategy, how they use, how they understood the market and everything, and they have the representations of our systems maps, and use that as a reference. All right?